on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, my Mark Meets guest is one of the best known and most talked about politicians in the country, the MP for North East Somerset, Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's live in the studio from 10. In the big question, will we ever solve the migrant crisis? And why is Remembrance Sunday still so important? We'll ask TV presenter, explorer and ex-Royal Marine Monty Halls. And the German press have decided to have a go at Britain, calling us a basket case country. My response, in my big opinion, straight after the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Mark. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. His Majesty King Charles has led the Remembrance Sunday service for the first time as sovereign following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. The King and Prince of Wales laid a wreath of poppies at the cenotaph in central London. The wreath incorporated a ribbon which paid tribute to his late mother and grandfather, King George, by using their horse racing colours. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and former Prime Ministers were also in attendance. 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing 300 different members of the armed forces took part in a march to honour the war dead. And a further 10,000 members of the public lined the streets of Whitehall to watch on and pay their respects. While the nation fell silent to honour those fallen in the line of duty. Big Ben chimed 11 times at 11 o'clock to mark the start of the nationwide 2-minute silence. Services were held across the country with bells ringing to commemorate all those who lost their lives. World leaders have been arriving in Indonesia for the G20 summit, including Rishi Sunak, who's on his way. He's expected to call out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine. Mr. Sunak will join the annual gathering of world leaders, saying this year's meeting will not be business as usual, with the focus on how countries can work together to solve global economic and security challenges. President Putin will miss the event and send his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov instead. The Chancellor says everyone will need to pay a bit more tax after he announces his autumn budget next week on Thursday. Jeremy Hunt warned sacrifices need to be made to get the economy back on track. He's thought to be considering a range of options, including an extended freeze on income tax and national insurance thresholds. Labour says further austerity is not the way forwards. Twitter has reportedly cut almost 4,500 contractors following a mass layoffs earlier this month. The platformer reports that many contractors say they received no notice from the company. The social media giant had already removed half of its staff after Elon Musk's takeover. The billionaire boss claims the layoffs are part of a major shake-up to save money. And the number of migrants who've crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year has now surpassed 41,000. GB News understands around 300 migrants have been taken to Dover Harbour after attempting that journey so far today. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the Kent coast. Meanwhile, Downing Street says talks on a deal with France over channel crossings are in their final stages. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
This is Mark Dolan tonight. Many thanks to Tatiana Sanchez, who returns in an hour's time. My Mark Meets guest is one of the best known and most talked about politicians in the country, Jacob Rees-Mogg. It will be a comprehensive and wide-ranging interview. We'll talk Brexit, the economy, Liz Truss's 44 days in power, and what he thinks of our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Jacob Rees-Mogg live in the studio after 10. In the big question, will we ever solve the migrant crisis? We'll debate that with former Tory Minister Anne Widdecombe and parliamentary candidate for Dover and Deal, Mike Tapp, speaking on behalf of the Labour Party. And why is Remembrance Sunday still important? We'll ask TV presenter, explorer and ex-Royal Marine Monty Halls. Reacting to the big stories of the day, my brilliant panel tonight, political commentator Ali Miraj, the deputy leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane, and journalist Lizzie Zita. Now, I want to hear from you throughout the show, mark@gbnews.uk, and this show has a golden rule. We don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. So for the next 2 hours, big debates, big guests, and always big opinions. Let's start with this one. On the occasion of Remembrance Sunday, it's a sad irony that talking down this great country has become a national pastime, perpetuated by a media that seems keen only to peddle negative stories about Britain. Take a look at this front page from The Economist magazine with an image of our then Prime Minister Liz Truss and her Chancellor in a sinking boat, signifying the UK. This is the same self-loathing British media that labelled us Plague Island in the early stages of the pandemic. Now look at The Guardian here, loving every moment of our national shame, with the headline, World's Media Ask How It Went So Wrong for Plague Island Britain. Britain has been characterised as having had a bad pandemic, even though the per capita death rate is comparable, even favourable, compared to our European neighbours. And now they're trying to characterise Britain as an economic basket case, the sick man of Europe, except that inflation is higher across much of the Eurozone, the national debt is higher in countries like Italy and France, and Germany looks set to have one of the deepest recessions in the world next year, with Deutsche Bank predicting a contraction of 3 or 4%. How ironic, therefore, that the Germans should decide to indulge in a bit of Britain bashing themselves. With this front-page story in the best-selling German magazine Der Spiegel. Take a look. Here's the headline I'll translate for you with my GCSE German. The Banana Island, how Britain became the laughingstock of Europe, with Big Ben being characterised as a massive bendy banana. Is this the same Germany that famously lost control of the pandemic at the end of 2020, as admitted by their then Chancellor Angela Merkel, the most overrated politician of the last few decades? Is this the same Germany that had much stricter mask mandates with superior quality masks, FFP2 and N95, which didn't make a blind bit of difference to stopping the spread of the virus? Is this the same Germany that has failed to modernise its economy and is now over-reliant on heavy industry, which, given how cheaply things are now produced in the Far East, is a shrinking business model? Is this the same Germany that's got more unemployment and more homelessness than the UK? And we're the basket case, are we? And that is before you get to energy. Having spent upwards of 200 billion euros on flaky renewables over a decade, Germany faces a winter fuel crisis and are continuing to enrich Vladimir Putin with their purchase of Russian oil and gas. Germany has been Russia's biggest customer for years and have therefore bankrolled Putin's deadly war machine. But we're the ones that should feel bad, are we? Because we were so naughty leaving the European Union and deciding to be sovereign. Now, don't get me wrong, Germany is a beautiful and mightily impressive country. The people are brilliant, and what about that beer? I have much-loved relatives in Germany, and it is an economic and industrial powerhouse. But it is in decline, partly because of the mediocre political efforts of Angela Merkel, and partly because of the iron grip of the Green lobby on German politics, which saw the disastrous and bizarre decision to cancel all nuclear projects in 2011. Angela Merkel, reliant on support from the Green Party, proudly announced that they were ditching nuclear, and the rest, of course, is history. Not that they weren't warned about this. The then President Donald Trump spoke to a German delegation and said they were over-reliant on Russian gas all the way back in 2018. Take a look.
Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are committed to maintaining our independence from the encroachment of expansionist foreign powers.
The German reaction from those delegates at the end there was to laugh. Well, they're not laughing now. I've heard lots of commentators in the last few months say that Britain is a laughingstock, but having led Europe out of COVID restrictions and having delivered a world-class vaccine rollout, and with the nimble-footed economic independence that comes with Brexit, I'm certain we will prove the doubters wrong. Britain is now an independent sovereign nation with a smart, coherent and dedicated new Prime Minister who will deliver some tough love on the economy and fix the roof for the stormy weather ahead. Inflation has likely peaked, energy prices are tumbling, and that mini-budget on Thursday ought to reassure the Bank of England that they don't need to crank up interest rates by much more than they already have. Rudyard Kipling famously said, "If you can keep your head whilst those around you are losing theirs." I believe that the fundamentals of the British economy are such that we will not just survive this coming storm, but that we will prevail over it. We are a diverse, creative, dynamic and talented workforce. We don't have any dogma about how things are done here compared to the stultifying bureaucracy of France, Italy, Spain or Germany. We have a free-spirited, free market economy, which is entrepreneurial and risk-taking, with particular expertise in the creative industries, financial services and manufacturing. We make loads here, including all of the Nissans from the Sunderland factory, which is the most productive car plant in Europe. So the desire to label this country as a once global force in decline is strong, both at home and overseas. But I'm not having it. My parents, Seamus and Diane, are Irish and came over in the 1960s. So perhaps I have the patriotic zeal of an immigrant. But I believe in this country, and it's my view its best days lie ahead. Those here and abroad, so keen to see us fail, fuelled by a frankly irrational hatred of Brexit, claim to be laughing at us now, but we will wipe the smile off their face. We don't need to make Britain great again. It already is. Anyone brave enough to write us off now is bananas. Delicious banana stolen from the GBNews fridge. Apologies to whoever I've deprived of their daily carbohydrates. Now, what's your view? Der Spiegel, the German magazine, equivalent, I guess, to Time magazine or The Spectator or The New Statesman. Well, that's their front page. It's a picture of Big Ben as a banana, Britain, the laughingstock of Europe. No, I'm not taking that from the Germans, but what's your view? Mark at gbnews.uk. Let's get the reaction now of my brilliant panel. Tonight we have political commentator Ali Miraj, the deputy leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane, and journalist Lizzie Zeta. Lizzie, who are those Germans kidding?
Well, you know, I think we deserve it a little bit, Mark. We have had really crazy politics. We had Trussonomics, which I believe, Mark, that you were so pro, Liz Truss. And I told you at the time, be careful, be careful. And I just think that I'm not surprised that certain people in the world think that this is a banana republic. Hopefully we will work our way out of it. But there are very big reasons why we're viewed on the world stage to be not as great as we could be.
What about those statistics that I quoted? Germany's going to have a deeper recession. They had a pretty dreadful pandemic. They're reliant on Russian oil and gas.
Well,
they've been funding Putin's war machine for the last few years. It's not exactly a spotless record, is it? And
no,
the bad guys?
No, not at all. I mean, Angela Merkel sidled up to Putin for many, many years. She was from Eastern Germany originally, and I always wondered why she was so pro-Putin. Maybe she was naive, but yes, she made many, many mistakes in that direction. And yes, it is true that Britain did lead the way out of the COVID situation, and we have many great people in this country. But just recently, the ups and downs in the economy and within the Conservative Party have been shocking.
Well, let's talk to Rebecca Jane, who is the deputy leader of UKIP. And Rebecca, setting aside the party politics for just a moment, I believe that attacking Britain, talking the country down, has become a national pastime and also the hobby horse of those around the world who seek to belittle this country, and I'm not having it.
Yeah, and of course, you know, Germany are going first. You know, we expect that from them, and quite frankly, I'm not listening to anything they've got to say. It's about what we think about our country and about what our people believe that is very important. Do I think that they have a point? A little bit, yeah. I mean, I adore you, Mark, but inflation has likely peaked. Energy crisis prices are tumbling. I don't agree. I think that this is quite optimistic. And I think that I sit on here and I rant a lot about how I don't like what our current government have done and the leadership that we've got. I think that what would actually help me get some trust back in them is if they put their hands up and they go, do you know what? We've made a real royal mess of this. It's time to draw a line under it and here are our plans on how to go forward, rather than glossing up a whole load of rubbish.
Ali Miraj, this narrative of doom-laden Britain, Plague Island, does not fit with reality. The fundamentals of the British economy and British society are very strong.
Well, Mark, I think, look, British society, I would agree with you. I mean, it's extremely diverse. I mean, the first Prime Minister of Indian origin in this country's history. I can't see that happening in any other European country, quite frankly. So I think we're way ahead of that. And finally, we've got someone competent. But, I mean, look, Mark, you put up that Economist front cover with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng in a boat that was capsizing. I mean, the reason why they put that on there, and look, the Economists were never fans of Brexit. I mean, you know that. But the reason why they put that particular picture on there was because it was an absolute and unmitigated disaster. Trussonomics completely and utterly failed. And what it shows is there is no Mickey Mouse fantasy economics to be had here. If you are going to cut taxes for the richest, which optically, by the way, is absolutely appalling, but economically totally illiterate as well.
Cost about $2 billion a year, which is nothing.
Well, $2 billion a year, but then all the other tax cuts as well, Mark. The basic rate tax cut, the stamp duty tax cut, the reversal of the increase in national insurance, which now, by the way, who's going to pay for the NHS, which is on its knees at the moment? Look, the reality is, in this country, you need to have an honest debate about what kind of public services you want and where the tax burden falls. Inequality in this country has been increasing for the past decade. Real wages have been falling. You've got, I mean, you talk about Brexit, Mark. You know, I didn't vote for Brexit, but I respect people who did. I'm a Democrat. I totally respect it. I wanted to make a good deal of it. But we can't say, honestly, hand on heart, Mark, that it's going particularly well. The Brexit dividend, apart from the COVID thing, fine. I agree with you that the vaccine rollout was a good thing. But, I mean, our exchange rate has plummeted completely. Our closest trading partners we're not doing as much trade with. It's become a lot more bureaucratic to do that. The Northern Ireland Protocol is an utter mess, by the way, which even Theresa May didn't sign up to. Boris Johnson did. And Lord Frost, who designed and signed that agreement, is now trying to renege on it, saying it's the worst thing ever. I mean, it's utterly bizarre. At least now we've got some hope that we've got a decent chancellor, a sensible prime minister, that understand that you can't have a something-for-nothing economy. And on Thursday this week, we'll hopefully be outlining some plans to get this country back on track. But let's be honest, it's going to be really tough. And the reason why it's going to be tough, Mark, is you can't borrow $400 billion for COVID. You can't end up subsidising people's energy bills when you're doing a war in Ukraine, which, by the way, I support, but it comes at a cost. Have the politicians been transparent with the public about the huge cost involved in the war in Ukraine? I don't think they have.
Well, look, great points raised by my panel. Just on a point of order regarding Trussonomics, I backed Rishi Sunak not just at the beginning of the year when he was revealed by the Mail on Sunday to be a lockdown skeptic who saved Christmas, but more recently in the Tory hustings. Sunak had my vote. But when Liz Truss got the gig, I looked at her plans and it seemed to me that she was going for growth and I offered my full support. The bottom line is that in the absence of that mini budget, it's clear we're going to have a deeper and longer recession. So U-turn if you want to. This presenter's not for turning. And when it comes to Brexit, like you, Ali, I very much supported Remain in 2016. And like you, I'm a very open-minded Democrat who accepted the result. And now, since we've had Brexit, I see it as an insurance policy against the United States of Europe, against a single European army, against billions of pounds being sent to Brussels, only to get a percentage back. And it's an insurance policy against a lot of other tyranny from Brussels that we saw in the course of the pandemic. But look, it's all about opinions. We'll discuss these issues with Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's live in the studio after 10. But what's your view? You've heard from Rebecca and Lizzie and from Ali. But drop me a line, mark@gbnews.uk. The best part of my show is when you get in touch. Coming up in the news agenda, we'll be talking to Monty Halls, the TV presenter and ex-Royal Marine, on why Remembrance Sunday is still so important. But next, in the big question, will we ever solve illegal immigration? We'll debate that with Anne Widdecombe. See you in 3.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Listen, a big reaction on email to my big opinion monologue. The German magazine Der Spiegel has characterised Britain as the laughingstock of Europe. Well, you're not having it. First of all, Roy says, Mark, well said in your monologue. These Europeans have always looked down their noses at these islands and the people here in this country as well. Look at Klaus Slaphead in the World Economic Forum. For an example, if only we could get decent politicians sorted out, we would be made instead of short-term thinking and heel-turning clowns who react to a tiny headline. Roy, thank you very much for that. Donald says, I'm with you, Mark. Fed up of all of these people rubbishing our country. I won't take it from the Germans or the French. They've all tried to sabotage our country, along with many from our own country, aiding them. Disgraceful. Russ says, Ali Miraj, your panellist, said the pound exchange rate had gone down because of Brexit. Has he seen the euro against the US dollar? Also, we get the views of Richard. Hi, Mark. The Germans are simply jealous and salty because we left Europe and are doing well outside of their silly club. The Germans don't like it up 'em, says Rick. I've seen a few movies that would contradict that view, but thank you, Rick. How about this from John? Hi, Mark. Just a quick note to say the markets and the economy are not connected, despite the narrative. During COVID, when all businesses were closed, the markets did not collapse. They should have. That was a clear indication that classical market economics have failed. And one more, whilst I fire up my little smartphone here. Alan, Mark, our biggest hurdle is the mainstream media who will not back Brexit Britain. The BBC, Sky TV, ITV and The Guardian loom large in our recovery. Look, I'll get to more of your emails very shortly, but let's now crack on with this. Yes, it's time now for the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. Tonight, more than 40,000 migrants have crossed the Channel to the UK this year. 40,000, according to government figures. A total of 972 people made the crossing in 22 boats just yesterday, bringing the total for this year to almost 41,000. In 2021, there were 28,000. And in 2018, it was 299. So the numbers have increased exponentially. The highest daily total on record was this summer, on the 22nd of August, with almost 1,500 people crossing in 27 boats. But with the government's Rwanda plan having seemingly stalled, a breakthrough deal between the UK and France to combat Channel crossings could be with us sooner than expected. The agreement, which would see an increase in French police on the country's northern beaches, could be ready as early as tomorrow, this according to The Telegraph. So is this important progress or another false dawn? That's tonight's big question. Will we ever solve the migrant crisis? I'll bring my panel in just a moment. But first, to debate this, I'm delighted to welcome former Conservative government minister and best-selling author Anne Widdecombe and Labour parliamentary candidate for Dover and Deal, Mike Tapp. Mike, a warm welcome to the show. Do you think we'll ever tackle the migrant crisis, or is it here to stay?
Well, it's gone on for long enough, and the Conservatives have clearly spent 12 years wavering on this and choosing gimmick policy that doesn't even work and completely failed. So if we continue to have a Conservative government, there's no way we're going to fix this problem. We need serious policy, not just headline-grabbing gimmicks, which is all we've seen so far. And it is a complex problem. It's not fixed just with one solution. But I'm confident that a Labour government, and particularly with what Keir Starmer's been saying recently, would fix this problem.
And what would Keir Starmer do that's so different, Mike?
So there's a number of policies that we're starting to push forward. And by the way, I'm a former soldier and former National Crime Agency officer, so I'm well equipped to help deal with this in Dover. And one of the big policies that we're looking at pushing at the moment is the introduction of a dedicated cell with the National Crime Agency, which is funded to solely focus on this issue. So they'd work upstream with the French and other European partners to smash the crime gangs so that it will stop people even leaving France and coming over. And that's just a part of the problem. Once they get here, what we've seen with the Conservatives is massive backlogs. It's just another part of backlog Britain. And we will speed up that processing so that those that need the help get it and those that shouldn't be here are returned.
However, if Labour are so serious about tackling the migrant crisis, why did they not back the Rwanda plan, which, Mike, for all its sins, is certainly aimed at being a deterrent? Mike? OK, we've lost Mike. We're going to Mike. Did you hear my question?
Sorry, I dropped out for some reason. Can you ask the question again?
Absolutely. We'll work with the vagaries of your broadband connection. If the Labour Party are so serious about tackling the migrant crisis, why did they not back the Rwanda plan, which, for all its sins, was aimed at being a deterrent to what is essentially the trafficking of human beings?
Because it's a costly gimmick. It was never going to work. The fact is, the moment they introduced this, they said it as deterrent, but actually the numbers coming across went up. So it's a complete failure. And why would we back something that's never going to work? We need sensible policy.
OK, I think we've got ongoing issues with Mike's line, but that's not a problem because Anne Widdecombe is waiting in the wings and chomping at the bit. Anne Widdecombe, Labour would do a better job of tackling the migrant crisis, says Mike Tapp.
Yes, and then he outlines a whole group of policies which, frankly, are just nonsense. First of all, the definition of madness is making the same mistake time after time and expecting a different outcome each time. We paid 55 million to the French, and what have we got from it? An increase in the number of migrants leaving their shores. So now we're going to pay them 80 instead of 55. And we expect a different result. Now, the essence of this, as I've said ad nauseum on your programme, is deterrence. If we don't send out a deterrent message, they will continue to come here, and it doesn't matter how much we pay the French, they're not going to stop them. So what you have to ask is, what should be the deterrent? And I have advocated for the last 20 years, that what we had to do was to detain all new asylum seekers in secure reception centres, not send them to hotels, not let them disappear into the underground economy, because that's very easy to do in this country, but put them where we know where they are, so that those who are genuine we can identify much more quickly and give a proper package to, but those to whom we are going to say no, we know where they are, and therefore it will be much easier to return them. And if there are blocks on returning them, they stay in detention. Now, nobody is going to pay £10,000, £15,000 to a human trafficking agent for that. And if we don't get a deterrent message out there, Mark, it doesn't matter what we do, we're not going to succeed. You've got to stop them coming. And all that we've heard from the candidate for Dover is what to do once they're here. I want to stop them coming.
And Widdecombe, what about the Australian idea, which appears to have been successful, which is a policy of refusal to process any asylum claims on the part of anyone that's entered the country illegally?
Well, your problem with that is that you do get a very small number, and I stress very small, number of genuine asylum seekers who do not want to be seen, who do not want to be heard, who will enter the country by clandestine means. Now, but there is a very, very small number of those. As a general policy, I think it's right to simply say, you know, if you have arrived here without the right documentation and by the right routes, terribly sorry, you can't come in. But that still leaves us with the challenge of returning them, and we have to keep them in secure conditions until we do return them. And as for Rwanda, and it would just let me mention Rwanda, of course it's right that it's not a deterrent at the moment, but that's because it hasn't happened. The moment that you actually get a plane load on its way to Rwanda, that's a deterrent.
Interesting stuff. Now, Mike, let me ask you about the Albanian situation. Of course, Albania is a wonderful country. It's an ally of the UK, but it's not exactly war-torn, is it? So what would Labour do with regard to Albanians entering the country illegally? After all, it's a territory which is more peaceful than the Isle of Wight.
Well, firstly, I think we need to be asking questions in Albania as why so many young men are looking to leave there when it's not a war-torn country, as you said.
Is that our problem, Mike?
We shouldn't... Sorry, say again.
Is that our problem, to self-reflect as to why Albanian men are coming to the UK? Is that our job to worry about that?
We should certainly be working with international partners to figure out the problem rather than sticking our heads in the sand. But when it comes to Albanians coming over and might be comfortable singling out nationalities and types of people so that they're on receipt of hate crime on the street, I'm not comfortable with that. What I am comfortable with is speeding up the processing of those that are coming over so that those that shouldn't be here are deported and those that should receive the help they need. If we get the process right and sort the Home Office out, then these problems will start solving themselves. You know, I'm not into this dog whistle policy which feeds into extremism and racism. I've worked in counter-terrorism. I see how this can develop into dangerous rhetoric, and we must be careful with that language.
However, Mike, as I've mentioned, no ill will to the great people of Albania. We've got many thousands of fabulous Albanians living and working in this country, making great lives here. That is, of course, that is what this country is all about. But nobody that's Albanian should be entering this country illegally. Surely that's an open and shut case of no, no, no.
Look, as I've said, the way of dealing with this is getting the Tories out, get a Labour government in that's serious on this issue, controlling the borders, which I've explained we will do efficiently rather than with gimmick headlines, getting the processing sped up, because there are people that need our help and we should provide that. But of course, those that shouldn't be here should be returned. There's no point in these gimmick headline-grabbing policies such as Rwanda, or Anne's talking about locking them all up. It doesn't work. Yes, it might trick some people into voting for the Conservatives or perhaps some of the more extreme parties, but it simply doesn't work. If we have sensible politicians who actually care about the country, then we will fix this. And Labour has that. I've served the country in Iraq and Afghanistan. Keir Starmer's served the country. A lot of these Conservatives only care about themselves and their mates.
Mike Tapp raises an important point, Anne, which is that the Rwanda plan has not kicked in yet, not a single flight, and it's hysterically expensive. And Mike could easily argue that a Labour government couldn't do a worse job than this current Tory outfit.
Well, they certainly will if they're asking themselves, as Mike did, why are young men leaving Albania? Now, the answer is because they can earn a lot more over here than they can earn in very low-wage economy in Albania. So what are we supposed to do about it? Are we supposed to send money to Albania to pay their workers more? I mean, honestly, Mike, that is the most ludicrous argument I've ever heard. And as far as Rwanda goes, as I said just now, it will only take effect when the first plane load has left. And if you're going to tell me it's expensive, yes, it's expensive, but how expensive is it to just keep endless people here in hotels with no prospect of sending them back? Stop them coming in the first place.
Let's bring my panel in. Mike and Anne, I'd like to introduce you to the following individuals. So we've got political commentator Ali Miraj. We've also got Rebecca Jane, who's the deputy leader of UKIP, and Lizzie Zita, who is a top journalist. Ali, do you want to have a go at this one? What do you think?
Well, I think that one of the reasons why the Tories actually went for the Brexit vote, or at least the Brexit vote was won, and now we have a Tory government which was led by someone who believed in Brexit, and we still do, was immigration. And I think it looks really, really bad when you have a situation where you have over 40,000 people already have come this year. It looks like you can't control your border. Now, I think we need to be careful to make a distinction between genuine asylum seekers. By the way, they shouldn't be crossing in small boats, but there is a distinction between genuine asylum seekers and economic migrants. The Albanians, the majority of them coming across. And by the way, I can't understand why half of them have actually been granted asylum in this country. I don't understand. Maybe someone from the Home Office can actually explain to me why the majority of them, being single men, have been granted asylum when Albania is, as Mike said, not a country, it's not a war zone. You've got Edi Rama, the Prime Minister of Albania, saying that we've got an insane policy and it's out of control. Well, how about you control your own people coming here in the first place? It's absolutely outrageous. If you want to come into this country, there is a points-based immigration system. You can apply like everyone else and join the queue, and if you've got the right skills and they're needed, then you can come in. You can't circumvent the normal immigration system by acting as a bogus asylum seeker to try and make your way here. It's completely and utterly indefensible. We have to work with the French. I mean, Anne talks about 55 million given. Well, it's not been easy now. It's not easier since we've left the EU, because now we can't return these refugees, asylum seekers so quickly to countries in Europe. I mean, it was never really working that well to start with. So, look, the whole thing looks absolutely shambolic. On the Rwanda plan, by the way, just my final point, the Rwanda plan's all very well. I mean, I'm happy to give the Rwanda plan a go, but typical of the government, come out with rhetoric and absolutely botched execution. If you want to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, then do it first before announcing a plan that you then can't deliver on, because all you're doing is marching people up the hill and marching them back down again, and that is not a healthy or sensible thing to be doing.
Rebecca Jane, well, Anne, you're just waving your hand there. I'll let you come back. Anne Widdecombe?
Yes. The issue there, the fact is that an awful lot of countries who are signed up to the European Court of Human Rights implement far less of their rulings than we do. We could simply have said, tough, we're doing it.
Anne, you raise a good point. The French have been ignoring the ECHR for years now and getting endlessly castigated by the EU for doing just that. Rebecca Jane, what's UKIP's position on this?
Actually, quite similar to Anne. I am absolutely... Queen Anne for me. That was absolutely brilliant. Well done to you. Mike, unfortunately, I think everything you said was everything you're saying that you're not about the gimmicky headlines. Your idea is going to make it far worse than what the Conservatives have done, and that's quite hard to do at the best of times. UKIP's plan is very similar to Anne, like I said. So our plan is that we wouldn't let them get to shore, because the problem is once they get to shore, that's when it just turns into an absolute free-for-all and they get put in 4- and 5-star hotels.
But how are you going to stop them, Rebecca? How are you going to stop them?
Well, there is a plan that is currently being worked on, and it involves certain shipping containers in the middle of the sea and a very difficult plan to get around, and it would be certainly a deterrent. It goes one step further than Anne's plan, which, if Anne was in charge, I would like to see that.
Sorry, Rebecca, I'm confused. Containers in the middle of the sea. Can you explain?
Correct. Yes.
But how does that work?
Hang on a minute, Ali. I started it by saying to you there's a plan being discussed that's underway that I can't tell you specifically right now because it's a plan that's being discussed.
Rebecca, like the plan about the waves, like these machines were going to build up big waves to push the boats back, or the Navy was going to patrol the channel, or that we were going to go and...
Yeah, the Navy would be involved in the plan.
Yeah, and the Navy's given up. The Navy's basically gone back to base saying, sorry.
They need to be not doing, don't they?
OK. Lizzie Zita, look, perhaps Labour deserve a go at this. Keir Starmer's been consistent saying that he would actually build a relationship with the French And let's be honest, the key to unlocking this whole issue is President Emmanuel Macron. So perhaps Labour would do a better job.
Well, who knows if Labour would do a better job, but they're not here and they're not in power right now. And what I think should happen, there should be some kind of international refugee coalition with everybody involved, whereby we agree to take a certain amount of refugees. Now, I'm saying refugees. I would give precedence to a female judge in Afghanistan rather than a male coming from Albania, who is an economic refugee. And I have to say, Mark, I am the daughter of a political refugee and an economic refugee. It's not that I'm against people coming to this country, because I think what's happened with Brexit is that everybody's getting on the phone to their family over in Albania saying, hey, plenty of work here in England. They've got no cleaners. They've got nobody to work in the bars. They've got nobody to work in the restaurants. And that is absolutely true. I know a lot of people who work in hospitality, and they are really, really trying and suffering because they cannot find the right staff. So what does that say about our society?
A fascinating conversation. We've got all 5 of you. Please raise your hand if you think that we will ever solve the migrant crisis. There you go.
There is a
reluctant responses from Anne Widdecombe, who certainly recommends a robust, tough love approach, and Mike Tapp, who argues that a Labour government would get it sorted. Many thanks to Anne Widdecombe, who's with us every Sunday right through until Christmas as our resident political pundit. Anne, we'll see you in a week's time. And I look forward to the speedy return of Mike Tapp to the programme. He's Labour's prospective parliamentary candidate for Dover and Deal. And by the way, let me say, Mike, I salute you for the service you have given to this country as a soldier. What a hero you are. Brilliant stuff. More to come, including lots more from my panel. Next up, we're going to be discussing why it is that Armistice Day and Remembrance Sunday are still so important. We're going to speak to a top ex-Royal Marine about that. And don't forget, at 10 o'clock, my Mark Meets guest is one of the most influential Tory MPs of the last decade. We've got Jacob Rees-Mogg live at 10. And the papers at 10:30 with my panel. Lots to get through. See you in 3.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg. And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Will we ever fix our broken immigration system? This from Derek. Mark, Albania is a democracy and a free country despite its low standard of living and reputation. As such, it cannot deny its own citizens the right to travel abroad just because the authorities may suspect they intend seeking asylum for no good reason other than wanting to be in the UK. Alan says, on migrants, I think you'll find Blair and Labour are responsible. In relation to their immigration policies when they were in office in the 90s and 2000s. David says, Mark, stop all legal aid for immigration, which we also pay for, and no right to go to the courts. David, at some point we do need to discuss the aspect of how lawyers are influencing and possibly slowing down the process by which asylum applications are made. How about this on the issue? Steve says, Mark, why don't we have a moratorium on immigration along with a referendum? Should the Navy just not pick them up and escort them back to France? This should be the deal. Sunak agrees with Macron. It is that simple. And just a brief one on the economy from my good friend Richard, who says, Mark, a few weeks ago you were supporting Truss and now it's Rishi, but their economics are the opposites. You don't tax yourself out of recession. You make it worse. Rich Rishi will prove to be a political disaster, but then he will be off to California, to the land of loony lefties. Richard, thank you for that. Keep those emails coming, mark@gbnews.uk. But now, the UK fell silent on Remembrance Sunday as the King led the nation in honouring servicemen and women who died in past conflicts. A national 2-minute silence was held at 11 a.m. with similar ceremonies at war memorials across the country. Big Ben chimed 11 times as the silence began, with war veterans watching on. King Charles then laid a wreath at London's Cenotaph, the first time he's done so as monarch following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Other royals, including the Prince of Wales, the Earl of Wessex and the Princess Royal, laid wreaths, along with the Prime Minister and other senior politicians. But with these courageous events slipping into the heavy mist of history, it's worth remembering why we mark this occasion. Why is Remembrance Sunday still so important? To answer that question, I'm delighted to welcome TV presenter, travel writer, leadership coach and former Royal Marine Monty Halls. Hi, Monty.
Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well. Lovely to have you on the show. And let me also salute you for your service to this country. Why did you enter the military in the first place?
I think, like a lot of young men and women who join the forces, you know, maybe your motivations aren't terribly sort of highfalutin or terribly, you know, queen and country. You're drawn to the challenge and you're drawn to the structure and the promise of adventure and companionship and everything that the services provide. But interestingly, as your service progresses, actually you become much more aware, bigger picture, I think. You become much more aware of that kind of king and country element, that wider service element, and operating in areas where You know, there's disruption, there's potential threats to the UK, etc. You suddenly become aware of your significance within that picture. So, yeah, sort of combination of both for me, really.
Do you think we appreciate, because obviously and understandably we commemorate those we've lost in the past, but do we appreciate those in active service right now?
Yes, that's a very, very good point, Mark, because the British Armed Forces are very good at what they do, and they're in demand throughout the world. So although you'll get these very intense flashpoints such as Afghanistan, Iraq, the Falklands, and obviously major global conflicts where our armed forces have to step up, they're also constantly working overseas. That might be an advisory role. Obviously, you've got special forces involved in anti-terrorism and things like boarding vessels in the Gulf to stop the drug trade, which in turn funds terrorism. So it is a constant thing. I mean, there are certain things that make the news. For example, as I said, these regional conflicts. But there's obviously that rolling commitment as well, which ties up the young men and women of our armed forces constantly, actually.
Lots of my viewers have got kids, teenagers. I've got kids myself, Monty. I've tried to explain how important this weekend is and always will be. But for those that, you know, can't quite grasp the scale of what people went through and what they sacrificed, why do we need to remember the fallen every year? What would have happened if they had not given their lives so bravely? Where would we be now?
Well, Mark, the first part of what you just said is very significant, because the mere fact that we have Remembrance Sunday, the mere fact that we wear poppies, the mere fact that we have this one day that distills everything, and the fact that you're explaining that to your kids, as our whole generation is explaining it to the next generations and saying, this is why we do it. This is why it's so significant. This is obviously the reason we enjoy the freedoms we do. You know, an entire generation had to sacrifice themselves, World War II, World War I, and young men and women, Afghanistan and Iraq. You know, that was a very kinetic, very difficult, very dangerous place to be. And it really took its toll. But the mere fact that you're having those conversations shows the significance of Remembrance Sunday, because it means that it's one period, one day, when we say this is what it's all about. It's all about remembering why we enjoy the freedoms we do, and remembering the sacrifice of the people who've gone before. And as a nation, just saying thanks for what you did. We won't forget what you did. And that thing every year, that rolling year, I'll be explaining it to my kids, they'll explain it to their kids, and that's the reason that day is so significant.
Monty, brilliantly put. I love your books, I love your TV work, and also you're an inspirational speaker and leadership coach. Check out Monty's website, it's all there, montyhalls.co.uk. Catch up soon, Monty. Next up, in my take at 10, I'll be dealing with Joe Biden, who thinks he's running Britain, and Jacob Rees-Mogg live in the studio. See you in 3.
We are GB News. And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. Coming up next in my Take at 10, Joe Biden needs to keep his nose out of UK politics. And my Mark Meets guest is Jacob Rees-Mogg, live in the studio. Get your questions in now, mark at gbnews.uk. First, the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Mark. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. His Majesty King Charles led the Remembrance Sunday service for the first time as sovereign following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. The King and Prince of Wales laid a wreath of poppies at the Cenotaph in central London. The wreath incorporated a ribbon which paid tribute to his late mother and grandfather, King George, by using their horse racing colours. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and former Prime Ministers were also in attendance. 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing 300 different members of the armed forces took part in a march to honour the war dead. And a further 10,000 members of the public lined the streets of Whitehall to watch on and pay their respects. While the nation fell silent to honour those fallen in the line of duty. Big Ben chimed 11 times at 11 o'clock to mark the start of the nationwide 2-minute silence. Services were held across the country, with bells ringing to commemorate all those who lost their lives. World leaders have been arriving in Indonesia for the G20 summit, including Rishi Sunak, who's on his way. He's expected to call out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine. Mr. Sunak will join the annual gathering of world leaders, saying this year's meeting will not be business as usual, with the focus on how countries can work together to solve global economic and security challenges. President Putin will miss the event and send his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, instead. The Chancellor says everyone will need to pay a bit more tax after he announces his autumn budget next week. Jeremy Hunt warned sacrifices need to be made to get the economy back on track. Well, he's thought to be considering a range of options, including an extended freeze on income tax and national insurance thresholds. Labour says further austerity is not the way forwards. Well, Twitter has reportedly cut almost 4,500 contractors following mass layoffs earlier this month. The platform reports that many contractors say they received no notice from the company. The social media giant had already removed half of its staff after Elon Musk's takeover. The billionaire boss claims the layoffs are part of a major shake-up to save money. And the number of migrants who've crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year has now surpassed 41,000. GB News understands around 300 migrants have been taken to Dover Harbour after attempting that journey so far today. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the Kent coast. Meanwhile, Downing Street says talks on a deal with France over channel crossings are in their final stages. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. Big stories, big guests and always big opinions. My Mark Meets guest is one of the best known and most talked about politicians in the country, the Conservative MP for North East Somerset. In fact, he's just come hot foot from Somerset, Jacob Rees-Mogg MP. Plus, we've got tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 sharp with full panel reaction. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome political commentator Ali Miraj, the Deputy Leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane, and journalist Lizzie Zeta. Lots to get through. Jacob Rees-Mogg waiting in the wings, enjoying a cappuccino. But first, my take at 10. US President Joe Biden appears to be more confused than ever, yesterday referring to Cambodia, which is hosting an international summit led by Southeast Asian leaders, as Colombia. Take a listen.
And now that we are back together here in Cambodia, I look forward to building even stronger progress than we've already made. And I want to thank the Prime Minister for Colombia's leadership in the ASEAN chair.
There you go. Cambodia, Colombia. You say tomato, I say tomato. Let's call the whole thing off. And here he is in eloquent form addressing COP27 earlier this week.
In fact, the International Energy Agency recently concluded that our significant climate investment will, quote, help turbocharge turbocharge the emerging global clean energy economy.
Yeah, I want to turbocharge that sentence. This is the guy, don't forget, with the nuclear codes. Luckily, he'll probably forget them. Notwithstanding his daily howlers, which are too numerous to squeeze into a 2-hour show, he now thinks he's in charge of UK-EU negotiations over the Northern Ireland Protocol by demanding a deal by next April. UK government sources said that Mr Biden's intervention in the process was unsurprising given his Irish heritage and concern about the longevity of the Good Friday Agreement. However, they added that a deal would be struck only if the EU was willing to make further concessions on the involvement of the European Court of Justice in the policing of the protocol. Too right. But the US Democratic Party have a history of siding with the EU over UK national interests. Most notably when Barack Obama, the then president, said that Britain would be, quote, at the back of the queue for a US trade deal if we dared to restore sovereignty to this country and exit the bloc. Well, this blockhead Biden and his pals in Washington think they can browbeat the UK into accepting another fudge when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which places a border down the Irish Sea. We should never have accepted it in the first place, but it was the mechanism that ended the Brexit deadlock, and it's my view that the ever-pragmatic Boris Johnson most likely signed it off, knowing full well it wasn't fit for purpose and would have to be revisited further down the line. And it's clearly not fit for purpose. First of all, the principle that a political monolith like the European Union should dictate the national boundaries of another country is an intervention with historic precedent that doesn't exist. It's an outrage for a non-British outfit to divide up our country. Plus, the border checks are needlessly overzealous for the passage of goods between two islands that have seen frictionless trade for decades. The decision to needlessly over-police this border is nothing to do with protecting the single market. It's punishment for Brexit. If it's not resolved, given the impact the protocol's having on Northern Ireland politics, the economy in the region, and given its increasing tensions within the unionist community, the EU will be responsible for effectively restarting the Troubles, and they will have blood on their hands. Yes, we need a solution, and it seems Rishi Sunak will build on work already started by Liz Truss to end the deadlock, so the good people of Northern Ireland can once again have a functioning government, also that we hope that the smooth flow of goods can resume and that Brexit can be properly delivered across both of our islands. We're told a deal is in the offing, and if so, it will be in spite of, not thanks to, the needless lecturing from Joe Biden, a man who needs an hourly reminder that he's still actually president. Can you imagine a British politician dictating to the Americans like that? It would never happen. With crime in the US out of control, foreign policy in tatters, and an economy on the brink, Joe Biden is having trouble running his own country, which is why he should give up trying to run ours. It's time now for Mark Meets, in which I speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, showbiz, sport and beyond. Tonight, one of the best known and most talked about politicians in the country, the Conservative MP for North East Somerset, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Mr Rees-Mogg, welcome to the studio.
Oh, thank you for having me.
They say that there's an agreement, a deal in the offing with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol. What might that deal look like? When will it happen? And will it be satisfactory?
Well, those are very good questions. The key is that the European Court of Justice is not involved in deciding what goes on in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. It is no longer an outpost of the European Empire, and therefore it would be quite wrong for it to continue to be subject to control by the European Court of Justice. That is fundamental. It is part of the United Kingdom, and therefore the flow of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland should be free. And there is a bill passing through Parliament that does that. So if there is no agreement, then that bill can complete its passage and we can do it anyway. We are, as you pointed out earlier, a sovereign nation.
Indeed, although given our current challenging economic circumstances, if we were to unilaterally remove, activate Article 16 and cancel the protocol, there would be a trade war, and that would cost the country dearly, wouldn't it?
Well, we're the EU's biggest trading partner. We have a very large deficit with the European Union. So the cost to the European Union of not trading with the UK would be very significant too. Trade wars don't help anybody. I'm very against trade wars. I don't think we should indulge in one. If the EU decided to have one under the TCA, it has to be proportionate to the offence that they feel has taken place. They couldn't, under the agreement they've made, I mean, they could break their agreements, which they have in the past, but assume they stick to the agreement they made, they couldn't have a generalised trade war on changes to Northern Ireland.
Do you think that the EU will budge on the ECJ?
Well, I think the ECJ has no right to interfere in the affairs of a sovereign nation that is not part of the European Union.
No, but they've been happy to do that hitherto, haven't they?
Of course they have. But that, I think, is a red line for politicians in Northern Ireland, and if we want the Northern Ireland Assembly to reconvene fully. But it should be a red line for British politicians. We can't allow part of our country to remain under the suzerainty of the European Union.
Is it a red line for Rishi Sunak, do you think?
I would assume so. I mean, he's been pretty clear that he is committed to dealing with the Northern Ireland Protocol properly.
What's your overview now about Brexit and how it's going?
Well, the fundamental thing is that we now determine our own government. And that is so important. And then we can make choices. And we can make choices based on the democratic will of the British people. And I think that is fundamental to our future prosperity. And some of it's going to be in big things. So there is the potential of dealing with Solvency II, which could be worth, I think, £65 billion of extra investment a year. It's a really big thing. The Bank of England's dragging its feet, but leave that to one side. That's a big thing. But there are lots of little things that are happening. So we had a bill passing through Parliament, the House of Commons recently, on gene editing, which is going to be an improvement in agricultural processes for the UK that the EU won't have. We've got the retained EU law bill. There are 2,500 near enough pieces of EU legislation that we will be able to change and have our own rules for. And that's a great opportunity to free up our markets, make the UK more efficient, and take the dead hand of costly regulation off business.
Well, I speak as somebody that voted Remain, that I accepted the result, and now that we've got Brexit, it's clear that it's an insurance policy against ever being in the euro, which would be a disaster for our economy. It's an insurance policy against a single European army. We've seen how impotent the EU and Brussels have been in regard to Ukraine and how slow to act, unlike Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. It's an insurance policy against ever closer union, being part of the United States of Europe. Potential COVID tyranny. We know that the EU is drawing up a treaty which would allow for future pandemics and mask mandates and vaccine mandates, all the rest of it. We're free of all of that. So I understand that. But what would you say to those watching, small business owners who are struggling because of Brexit? We can't deny the short-term impacts, can we?
Well, let's go back to one of the things you said, because I think that's fundamentally important on Ukraine. I think had we been a member of the European Union in February of this year, under the doctrine of sincere cooperation, we would not actually have been able to do what we did to arm Ukraine, to help Ukraine, and to set a framework that has allowed Ukraine to be so successful. And that would have been one of the biggest defeats for the Western world, for Western values in modern history. So that is a really important consequence of not being in the European Union, not being subject to sincere cooperation, which is an important rule of foreign policy, which is determined by unanimity, but subject to this.
So Brexit has actually helped Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelensky to fight Russia?
Fundamentally, yes. I think this is of great importance and much under-commented on, actually. I think it's allowed British foreign policy, led by Boris Johnson, to work through policies that have helped Ukraine fundamentally. But to come to your question on small businesses, the issue here is on the small businesses that trade with the European Union. And yes, the EU has put extra checks on goods going from the UK into the EU. And it's done this because it's cross that we have left the European Union. It's not particularly in the spirit of the agreement we came to with them. And we quite rightly haven't retaliated. So goods coming from the EU into the UK are still pretty freely distributed and received. And that keeps input costs down and keeps consumer costs lower, because actually free trade is always good for the country that gives it. And we should give more free trade. We should make our market more open, so not just to Europe, but to the rest of the world, which is what we're doing with free trade agreements.
And what about Rishi Sunak? Now, you've described him in the past as a bad chancellor. Will he be a better Prime Minister?
Well, I'm going to support Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister because the Conservative Party needs to unite around somebody. The Conservative Party has done itself no favours by defenestrating one Prime Minister after another. This has done us a lot of harm, and it's not been good for the country either. We need clear, united government, so I will support him and let bygones be bygones.
What are your thoughts about rumoured tax rises in the latest budget statement on Thursday? Austerity 2.0 and tax rises for everyone. Is that the way to go?
No. I was reading on the way here a very interesting report by the IMF in 2018 on how economies had succeeded in the first round of austerity and which economies had done best in coming out of it. And the ones that had done best in coming out of it were the ones that had reduced expenditure but not increased taxation. And this is really interesting and important because of the long-term effects increasing taxation has on economic growth. And the key thing in the OBR forecast, the key variable, will be what their growth forecast is. If you can get growth a little bit higher, then debt to GDP begins to come down. And that must be the overall objective. If you put taxes up, you risk stalling the economy, so debt to GDP actually goes up. It risks making things worse rather than better. So I would encourage considerable caution about tax rises, and I hope that so far what we've heard has been kite flying to try and frighten the horses a bit, so that when it's announced, everyone heaves a sigh of relief and says, oh, well, thank heavens, it's only a bit of fiscal drag rather than all the great terrors that are being put forward in newspapers at the moment.
And although the IMF were critical of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's ill-fated mini-budget, they had to concede days after all of the U-turns that Britain would have a deeper recession in its absence. So do you think that's true too? Do you think that the failure of that first budget to be seen through will cause Britain to have a longer and deeper recession?
I think it was a pity that other things weren't put in place at the same time.
OBR?
There's a wonderful piece in the Telegraph in the last couple of days pointing out quite how wrong the ABR forecasts have been. The ABR is no better or worse than other forecasters, but forecasting is not a precise science, and it depends so much on the information you put into your model. That's what I was saying about GDP growth. If you vary GDP growth slightly, all the other figures change. Your deficit changes, your debt to GDP changes, and so you're trying to get to an authoritative figure from a whole series of speculations. And that inevitably is not going to get you to an authoritative figure. So I want to be careful about mistaking the ABR for Holy Writ.
Now that you're a free man, you're a sovereign politician, can you see yourself voting against this government anytime soon?
No, I intend to support this government in the division lobby, that the government has my confidence. Now, that's not to say there mayn't be some amendment to a bill there where I'm broadly supporting the bill, where I think X would be slightly better than Y. That's the routine of parliamentary activity. But on anything that relates to confidence in the government, of which the budget's pretty fundamental, I would expect to support the government.
I interviewed you on my radio show early in the pandemic about lockdowns. Of course, we saw these government measures, and I said to you at the time that you're a very principled man, you're a libertarian at heart, and I can't imagine that you'll have been much of a cheerleader for these lockdowns. Well, it emerged, an exclusive in the Mail on Sunday newspaper in late January of this year, that a holy triumvirate of yourself, Lord Frost, and Rishi Sunak, according to the Mail on Sunday, essentially saved Christmas at the end of last year, confronted the Prime Minister and said, don't give in to those prophets of doom at Sage. Did you save Christmas last year?
I don't think it's quite how I remember it, though it fairly reflects my view, because Boris Johnson had exactly the same view, so it wasn't a challenge to him. I think we're now...
So we can add him to that
We can add him to that list. He actually, Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, rang me on a Sunday evening when I was driving back from Somerset, before we had the discussion about whether we would close for Christmas, and encouraged me to express my views clearly. I didn't need a lot of encouragement, but Boris Johnson, in my view, was very clearly, throughout, always wanting to keep things as open as possible, and gave in to the professional advice, which was always extraordinarily cautious, and understandably so.
Although you'll be perturbed as a numbers man, having made your money in the city, at the consistent inaccuracy of modelling for the disease, which dictated government policy. If we had our time again, would you have pushed back on some of those lockdowns? I've got you down as a lockdown sceptic, are you?
I thought the first lockdown was perfectly reasonable before we knew anything. I was making the case privately for less in the way of lockdown once we had got through the first period. Yes, I was a lockdown sceptic. I had a lot of sympathy with what a number of MPs were saying in the House of Commons. But you make absolutely the right point. You have raised the question about modelling. What are we about to do now? We are about to have an economic policy entirely dependent on modelling. Why do we think an economic model is going to be any more accurate than a model of a pandemic? The truth is it's not. Modelling is an educated guess. It is not fact. And therefore you've got to apply judgment to it. And I think the mistake that we made early on in the pandemic, and almost everybody made, was to think that the models were fact rather than something to which you then needed to apply your judgment, and to think, is it reasonable not to allow people to accompany each other to funerals? And some of the restrictions we put in hindsight, were appalling and should never, ever happen again. And we must learn from that. And I hope the inquiry will look at things that were fundamentally unreasonable.
Was Boris Johnson a good Prime Minister?
Oh, Boris was an excellent Prime Minister. I think in terms of the pandemic, he got the big decisions right. I think it would have been extraordinarily difficult to have avoided lockdown. And then he got us out of it earlier than any other country, and he ordered the vaccine in enormous quantities, faster than other countries. He really pushed on with that. He delivered Brexit. And as you said in your introduction, he agreed to the Northern Ireland Protocol to get Brexit done. It needed to be done. It is now the law of the land. So no, I think Boris was a very good Prime Minister. And if you take Ukraine, I think we will look back on that in decades to come as one of the most important foreign policy decisions a British government has taken in the post-war period.
Do you anticipate his eventual return?
Well, I was encouraging his return just a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was a mistake to get rid of him in July. I thought it would have been marvellous to have brought him back in late October or early November, whenever precisely it was. He is a very interesting figure that it's very rare to have his type of charisma. It's something political parties are lucky to get once in a generation. Many of your viewers won't like this, but Tony Blair probably had it, and Margaret Thatcher had it, an extraordinary visceral connection with the electorate. And Boris has that in spades. People stop their cars to get out to see him. He connects with people in a way that other politicians don't succeed in doing.
A very clever man as well, but did he have the coherence, the discipline to be a great Prime Minister?
Oh, yes.
He's a very ordered personality, is he? He's chaotic.
But what are you looking for in a Prime Minister? Are you looking for an arch bureaucrat, somebody who puts everything in order and after 35 hours says, well, now it's time to go home? Or are you looking for somebody who gets the big calls right, who gets the big ideas right? Margaret Thatcher was very unusual because she was both. She both had the big idea and the detailed analysis. But I wouldn't say Churchill was particularly ordered or structured in his approach to government. I'm not sure Disraeli was. And we could go through lots of prime ministers. One of my favourite activities to work through them. But throughout our history, some of the great leaders are people who have the oomph and the vision to see what the big idea is and push that through, rather than being effective bean counters.
Are you the Prime Minister that got away?
Me? No. I was very keen to support Boris. So I didn't.
You're still young. Never say never.
Well, I'm not that young, actually. My children keep on pointing out to me, I'm getting on a bit now. I used to tell them that the reason my hair was the colour it's now going was because shaving foam had got stuck in it. I'm afraid none of my children any longer believe that.
Well, I think you're pretty sprightly. I haven't checked your age, but I think there's a lot more left in terms of your career. What would you like to do next? I mean, I think you'd make a great broadcaster as well as politician. Would you come and work for GB News?
That's very kind and very flattering. I think politics is about getting across the ideas that you think are important and doing that in as many ways as is possible. Being back on the backbenches is very liberating because before coming on to see you, I didn't have the chip put in to tell me what the line to take was. I am free to say what I think is interesting. And the battle of ideas is fundamental to politics, and there are various ways of doing that. But being a member of Parliament is a fundamentally important way of doing that, partly because it gives you the platform to represent views that you wish to put across, but also you have a closeness to voters because you represent them as a constituency MP, and they keep you so well informed about what is going on, what the effect of policy is. So it's both an honour to represent people, but it's also an amazing education.
Although, arguably, you're wasted on the backbenches. I think it was when you were business secretary, you said this department is going to be the department for economic growth. That's what we need at the moment from this government, isn't it? A relentless focus on growth, which sadly went the way of Liz Truss.
Oh, I don't know. I think Grant Shapps will be a very good advocate for growth as the business secretary. I don't think it needed me to do it, but of course we need to concentrate on economic growth.
Have the Tory wets taken over the party now? Lots of my viewers feel that the Conservative Party is not conservative enough. They look at someone like you and they say that's a Conservative, not the current incumbent at number 10.
OK, well, the challenge for people like me, the challenge for your viewers, is that we've got to win the argument. And unfortunately, with the mini-budget, whether for the short term or for a medium term, we lost the argument. It'd be pretty silly to pretend otherwise. It's like all those socialists who go on and say, if only we'd been a bit more socialist. And it's never true. What we need to recognise is that we tried to get across Conservative policies. We hadn't got our ducks in a row. Things didn't work. We have to learn from that and articulate the policies that as a package will work. That's the real challenge, rather than simply saying the people who are now in charge aren't Conservative, because they've all stood on a Conservative manifesto.
Just a couple of minutes to go, and thank you for giving up a chunk of your Sunday evening. The kids are probably in bed now, fast asleep.
Certainly the younger ones are.
I
wouldn't swear to the older ones.
You've got a lovely family, congratulations. And very, very happy kids, and with a famous dad. There have been occasions when you and your family have been harassed on the street, on your property, which is absolutely reprehensible. I watched those scenes. They were unedifying and wrong. Does it hurt you when that kind of thing happens?
No, I chose to go into public life. And I have never had any threat of physical violence. It is a free country. People are allowed to protest. I've always been very relaxed about that. And I think the right to protest peacefully, I don't include shutting the motorways in that, I think that's in a different category, is really fundamentally important. Freedom of speech is one of the things that makes our Constitution work. And if that means I'm occasionally shouted at, that is a very small price to pay. And when I got walked home by the police from Parliament on one occasion with my eldest son, and people were so nice to me, they said, oh, your poor son, how horrid for him, and so on and so forth. And I spoke to him, and he said, Daddy, can we have a police escort every time we walk home? So children are quite robust.
Well, that's it's good of you to be so sanguine, and you are consistent in being a free speech advocate, and I completely understand that. And then just briefly, a couple of other things. First of all, I think you're the most sartorially elegant member of the House. So where do you buy your suits? Are they tailor-made? Is it Savile Row?
I'm not the most sartorially elegant. I'm the most sartorially consistent. I basically have a number of suits, all exactly the same.
Any idea how many suits you've got?
No.
There'll be a few.
There'll be a few, but they are all identical.
Right. And do you ever dress down? Have you ever worn shorts?
Not since. As a child, I was forced to. I always hated wearing shorts as a child. I've never worn them in adulthood.
Oh, and I'm sure you're hiding an excellent pair of pins. Your friend and former colleague Matt Hancock's in the jungle. Was that a mistake to go onto that show?
Yes, it was, and he was ill-advised to do it. But there is an important but. There's a very important article in the Sunday Times today. I think the treatment he is getting has gone beyond good fun and become deeply unpleasant. And it rather worries me that people think it is funny to humiliate somebody in this way. I think it is a regrettable side of our culture. And I think it's gone from being Matt Hancock's gone into the jungle, let's tease him a bit, to something really rather unpleasant. I'm not at all comfortable with what is being reported as to the way he's being treated. I can't say I've ever watched the programme, but I've certainly read the newspapers about it. And I think it's just gone too far and has become unpleasant.
Final question, $1 million question. The date of the next general election, and what is the percentage chance of a Tory victory?
I think it will go late, and the last date is January 2025. I doubt it'll be quite as late as that, but I expect it to go late. And I think participants in elections are advised to say anything other than the routine that they expect a fantastic Tory victory. It's not our job to forecast the result.
My best wishes to the family.
You are kind.
Enjoy your newfound freedom.
Thank you very much.
And look forward to seeing you again in the studio, I hope. Jacob Rees-Mogg MP, your reaction, mark at gbnews.uk. Next up, we've got the papers with full panel reaction. See you in 3.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
My thanks once again to Jacob Rees-Mogg MP for joining us in the studio. I'll get your reaction shortly, mark at gbnews.uk. But at this time, every Friday, Saturday and Sunday, we take a look at tomorrow's papers, and we shall start with the Daily Mail. And they lead with the following. A&E chief, hospitals harm the elderly. Britain's top A&E doctor says he's desperate to keep his elderly parents from going into hospital this winter because he fears they won't come out again. In a First Frank interview, Dr Adrian Boyle, the new president of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, said hospital crowding and bed blocking were killing hundreds every week. Next up, the Independent, months of hell. Beltrue reports from Curzon as it emerges from occupation. And record waits for asylum seekers as backlog soars. More than 10,000 have waited at least 3 years for a decision. The I newspaper, tax rises for all and energy help just for the poorest. Sunak warns the UK could face another financial meltdown without tax hikes and spending cuts. We're all going to pay more taxes, says the Chancellor as he braces the nation for Thursday's Crunch Autumn statement and seeks to plug a £60 billion black hole, control inflation and rebuild the UK's credibility. Jeremy Hunt will also scrap universal energy bills help from April, offering relief only to the most vulnerable households, meaning millions will pay hundreds more on top of higher mortgage costs. The Guardian next, the hospitals where a third of patients can't go home. Up to a third of hospital beds in parts of England are occupied by patients well enough to be discharged, with a chronic lack of social care, leaving many without suitable places to be accommodated. Everyone will pay more tax, says Sunak and also his Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, and at least 6 dead after a bomb blast in Istanbul. The Times, new pact with France to stem flow of migrants. Number crossing the Channel this year hits 40,000. And we'll suffer if taxes don't rise, says Sunak. The Daily Telegraph, Russia is a rogue state, Sunak tells G20 leaders. Everyone will pay more tax, says Hunt, as he plans new raid. And also, courts call on retired judges to clear the backlog of cases. Also, Republicans blame Donald Trump for the loss of the Senate. The Metro, a nation's gratitude. Charles lays a first remembrance wreath as our monarch, in echoes of something his wonderful mother did for so many years as the leader of our country, of course, the Queen Elizabeth II, much loved and much missed. Also in the Metro, we'll all pay more tax. Hunt's budget warning, as it's revealed, Trussonomics has cost us $30 billion. Daily Star, while we're all struggling, it's Westminster bubbles. More than £250,000 has been spent on booze in Parliament in a year, as the rest of us tackle a cost of living crisis. There you go. It's a shocking and outrageous story from the Daily Star. And those are your front pages. I'm delighted to say, reacting to the big stories of the day, we have Lizzie Zita, Rebecca Jane and Ali Miraj. Rebecca Jane, where should we start? A&E chief, hospitals harm the elderly. They are like lobster traps. Easy to get into, but hard to get out of. I'm desperate to keep my parents out of hospital. The NHS is falling apart, isn't it?
Couldn't agree more. And that comes as somebody who lost a grandmother a few months ago, who was in her 90s. Yes, is all I can really say, because I've raised serious concerns with the NHS Trust that looks after our area on 3 occasions in the last year, and I see nothing being done.
Yeah. No, what is the problem? Is it money? Is it policy? Is it the pandemic?
I think it is a bit of everything. On top of, I think that you get to a certain age, they don't care as much, if I'm being brutally honest. The treatment, because I cared for my grandmother for 9 years before she died, and in that period of time we had numerous A&E visits and hospital visits, and the level of treatment that older people get is just not the same as what, you know, for example, my grandmother actually died of blood loss. Well, if the same thing happened to me as what happened to her, there'd have been absolute hell would have been created, but my grandmother was left for 37 hours. And that's because I think that... exactly. And so I think that that is because you get to a certain age, and I just don't think that they care as much. And I think that there's so many things that need to be done to look after our elderly relatives and people in our lives that it needs seriously addressing very urgently.
Well, yes, and also, Rebecca Jane, we've got The Guardian, the hospitals where a third of patients can't go home because of a lack of resource within the care sector. Well, I wonder whether sacking, what was it, 40,000 care home workers for not getting the vaccine won't have helped?
And actually, well, absolutely. But then on the other hand of that, like I say, you know, Grandma had Alzheimer's and dementia. She lived on her own. And actually what I experienced was that they tried to kick her out at every available opportunity. And if she didn't have us that was there saying she's not fit to go home, she can't look after herself, then she would have just been sent home. And she was always sent home far too quickly. So I don't actually quite agree with that at all.
The issue we've got, Lizzie, is that whilst nurses and doctors are held in high regard, I wonder whether the NHS risks essentially losing the dressing room when it comes to the country, falling into disrepute as patients just don't get the service they're paying for.
Well, it's true, but the burden on them is absolutely huge. I completely sympathise with what you were saying. My father got pneumonia in hospital, and that was what killed him in the end. It's very difficult.
He got it in hospital?
Yes, he did.
Was this during the pandemic? Or...
No, it wasn't during the pandemic. It was about 4 years ago. He got pneumonia and he died from that, which is and he had Alzheimer's, but that's what basically happens. And they were saying, you need to get him out. You need to bring him home. You need to get him out, get him out, get him out. We don't have the beds, etc., etc. But we weren't happy with the care homes that they were suggesting.
Oh, no, they're another story.
So I just kept saying, no, he's not going in there.
At least a hospital is a professional medical setting.
Well, absolutely. And we took care of him for as long as we could. But when we couldn't physically pick him up off the floor, Mark, anymore, my husband and I were always running round there. He had to go into hospital. It's with an ageing population, this needs to be addressed. Because once the boomers get into 80, 90 years old, it's going to be huge fallout.
I just worry, Ali Miraj, that the NHS has reached the point of no return.
Well, Mark, I mean, look, the thing is, when we talk about funding, you'd actually find that in the developed economies, we're actually spending quite a lot on the NHS. In fact, we're one of the highest spending countries on the NHS, but we're still having 50,000 excess deaths a year. and one of the worst health outcomes in the developed world. So something's not quite working. Look, my mother was an NHS doctor for 40 years. I've got a huge amount of respect for people who work in the service, but they are under immense pressure.
They are.
COVID has not helped. There's a 7 million now backlog on waiting lists. I mean, we talk about care. Care in two senses is important. One, care homes don't have enough resource, they don't have enough space, so you actually get bed blocking in hospital. The other aspect of care is that there aren't enough carers to look at you if you look after you when you go home. I've got some personal experience of this. One of my own relatives uses carers, and it's very difficult to... It's a very tough job to do. You don't get paid much to do it. Other people have resigned from the care sector because they can get paid more even in the hospitality industry. So it's very difficult to do. And this is one of the things, to be fair to the government, under Rishi Sunak, they had said that they wanted to increase national insurance by 1.25%. That has now been reversed. I mean, this is, by the way, something the Labour Party opposed because they didn't want to be increasing taxes during the middle of, on the back of COVID when things were tough. But the reality is, if you don't bite the bullet on this stuff, everyone keeps talking about the care sector needs more money, the care sector needs more money. Well, you can't keep borrowing to fund day-to-day spending. You have to raise taxes. When they tried to do it, no one wanted it. Now they're reversed it. It's not happening. We've got problems.
And can I just also say that, this immigrant problem is extremely difficult, but we don't have enough carers, and these are the kinds of economic migrants who may be interested in doing that kind of job. And I think this country has a long history. When my parents first came here, my mother was a cleaner because nobody else wanted to do that work. The Italians, the Spanish, they made great cleaners, and they moved up from there. But I think
But you don't mean people landing on our shores in small boats. You would sort of change visa rules to accommodate more migrants to the country to fill the skills gap?
And also the people look, it's there and there. It's Topham. In the tech industry, I have investor friends who have said to me, Lizzie, we cannot proceed with this project because we don't have the tech people, the highly educated tech people, they've all gone abroad.
Yeah.
That's not
good. Lizzie, just on that point, though, I mean, part of the whole philosophy behind this whole Brexit thing was that you don't keep importing cheap labour, which companies have got hooked on, but you actually try and increase productivity, which means basically you invest more in manufacturing, upskilling your automation, etc., which then pushes people to higher skilled jobs. And also, at the lower end of the spectrum, at the lower skilled end of the spectrum, you pay more so you don't get hooked on cheap labour. Now, the reality is that we've had 3 years. It's not quite working out as some people expected. There will be an adjustment period, but at some stage, we will have to work out what we need as a country, and that should be being updated over time. On an annual or biennial basis, there should be, the government should actually look at the skills shortages and actually give visas based on the points needed to get people in the sectors where they're required.
Agreed.
We don't look after our people that we've got in these industries. The solution is not to bring in other people so that we can treat them badly as well. Like, we should just be looking after the people that we've got, paying them the right wages, and therefore we won't have the problem that we have.
But that means more taxes. That does mean more taxes.
The care industry because they're not looked after in it.
But that does mean more taxes. I mean, Rebecca, there's no like easy way out of it, right?
No, there's no easy way out of it.
Exactly.
Bringing in more people to pay them less and to treat them badly is not the solution.
No, I didn't suggest that
I know you're not suggesting
not for a moment that we treat them badly.
OK, well, look, lots more to come from the papers next. See you in 3.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg. And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament.
But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight. Look, a lot of people ask me who actually outputs the show. Well, I've got the most amazing producer, and finally he's let me actually show you a photograph of him. So here he is. He's a very handsome devil. And it's Archie. Let me tell you, he's had a rough day, and I've got a bone to pick with him. But I can assure you he's not a bitch.
Mark.
Great job, Archie. And Archie's excellent owner, Chloe, who is my real director. Well done to everyone tonight for a really busy show. Thanks for your company and your emails, which are coming in thick and fast. Let me just have a look at what we've got. Hillary on Jacob Rees-Mogg, my guest at 10 o'clock. The perfect Prime Minister, we wish. What a gentleman. With the most gracious attitude and non-judgmental. I agree with everything he said. Thanks for letting us hear a truly real man with principles. Everyone can learn from him, and the UK would be a better place if we had a leader just like him. Hillary says... oh, no, that was Hillary. Let's have a look at... There's so many emails coming in. Ian, brilliant interview. Jacob restored our faith in the Conservative Party. What a super guy. They're not all like him in the party. Ian and Diana... who are Red Wall Conservatives in beautiful County Durham. And last but not least, A&E is in a mess, and well-paid nurses are going on strike. 3 years at uni, and like most students, come out with a degree and left-wing attitudes. No strikes when nurses learned on the job in hospitals and were not brainwashed at university. That from Annie in Norwich, who's not pulling her punches. Look, I'll get to more of your emails shortly. Just briefly, before we get to some other big stories, including the economy. Ali, that's an issue for the nurses, is the NHS is already under pressure. There's a waiting list of 7 or 8 million people. Yep. It's not going to be helped by a strike in which the RCN are seeking an inflation-busting 17%. It's not a good look, is it?
Well, look, I mean, the RCN 17%, Mark, it's not practical. But the reason why they're asking for 17%... They're having a laugh, aren't they? Well, look, I don't think an inflationary pay rise of 17% is really justifiable right now, but I understand where where they're coming from. The reason why they're asking for this is they're saying that in recent years they haven't had any inflationary pay rises. They've had real terms pay cuts going back many, many years. And it's not just the nurses who feel this way. It's port workers, it's rail workers, it's junior doctors are potentially going to be striking early next year. So there's problems across the public sector, and this is the real issue that the government has got. Government's probably going to be saying on Thursday that it's been kite flying, that it's going to be 2% across the board public sector pay rises. Now, that's not going to cut it with people, right? This is why I've been saying for weeks, Mark. Every time I come on your programme, I say the capitalist system, by the way, I'm a capitalist, is not working. And you can see this happening right now. Now, obviously, 17% is not reasonable. I wish they wouldn't strike, but I understand why they're doing it. And also, they've said that the emergency services won't be affected. But look, there's more of this to come.
More of this to come. Is that acceptable, Rebecca Jane?
No.
I mean, what about the nurses? What's UKIP's position on the nurses? I would say read the room. Yes, you deserve a pay rise, but the economy's broken. I don't remember too many people in the public sector speaking out against the lockdowns, which have caused this economic damage. We paid £500 billion to keep healthy people at home for 2.5 years.
Oh, I know. I think it's a really difficult situation because I don't think anybody disputes the job that they do. And I don't think anybody disputes that they are entitled to a pay rise. But the amount of a pay rise that they're asking for is absolutely ludicrous because, you know, the average plumber or electrician or most people cannot go around and just say, I want a 17% pay rise. It's not going... Well, it may happen, but it shouldn't be happening unless everybody in the country... Because everybody does a good job. You know, everybody down to even the people that were driving the vans, you know, delivery drivers and things like that. We all helped the economy to carry on going round during COVID and we all did our bit. They're not striking and unfortunately we've got so many industries that are striking. Something has to be done pretty soon.
Lizzie Zita in the I newspaper, tax rises for all and energy help only for the poorest. Now, that means the government think that lots of people in this country are rich who aren't, who are going to face horrific energy bills as of April next year, and that will coincide with mortgages going up and rents as well, probably. How bad is it going to get?
Get me on a boat and get me out. It's going to get very, very bad. It's going to get very bad indeed. I mean, it's just a really difficult situation. Taxes do need to go up to pay for everything, but at the same time, if you tax people too much, growth is going to be totally killed.
Race to the bottom, isn't it?
I think yeah, absolutely. It's a very difficult balancing act, and I'm glad I'm not in charge, that I have to take that kind of direction.
Look, if you spend this much money, right, you have to, unless you want to mortgage your kids and your grandkids' future, if you spend $400 billion on COVID, we've got to actually, I mean, we've got to pay double tax.
Absolutely.
I mean, you have to, right? I mean, you can't just furlough loads of 11.7 million people and expect not to pay. And then on the energy thing, I just honestly feel, and I raised this before, the government has not been open and honest about the cost of the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is costing money, right? I'm not saying that we should not support the Ukrainians. Of course we should, but then be open with the public about the economic cost involved and the fact that there's going to be pain. You can't defer that pain in perpetuity. It's going to cost $60 billion for 6 months of support, right? The government doesn't want to spend another $60 billion. That's why it's saying from April it's going to revise it. And only the poorest are going to get support for that very reason.
Well, there you go. The debate will go on. Can I thank my amazing panel tonight? Ali Miraj, out the park. He's brought his A game. What did they put in his tea? Rebecca Jane, we know what they put in her tea, and you don't want to know. And the wonderful Lizzie Zita, who's clear-headed. Headliners is next. I'll see you on Friday at 9. Thanks for your company.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me noon on Saturdays and Sundays.